the stranger who stopped on a winter night and reshaped her entire fate. Before we begin, comment your country so I know where the story is reaching. The storm had erased the horizon, turning the Wyoming night into a single sheet of white. At a lonely rail stop along the freight line, Mara Whitcomb waited with a satchel on her lap, her breath rising in small pale clouds. She had arrived with no plan beyond survival, carrying only her medical kit, her certificates, and a memory of a life she refused to return to. The cold pressed through the station walls. The clock above her ticked like a slow heartbeat in an empty room. Mara had once worked in a charity infirmary back east, treating illnesses no one wanted to see and patients no one wanted to claim. When a senior physician tried to force himself on her, she fought back. Her courage cost her everything. Rumors spread faster than truth, and reputations in the city were ruined long before anyone asked for facts. Jobs vanished. Friends vanished. All she had left was a stubborn belief that usefulness still meant something somewhere. Tonight, usefulness wasn't enough to keep her warm. She wrapped her coat tighter and listened to the wind batter the station door. The next train wouldn't arrive until morning, if the snow didn't bury the tracks completely. She could feel the ache in her fingers and the dull burn in her toes. She whispered to herself to stay awake, stay alert, stay alive. Then she heard hooves. They were slow, steady, and too calm for a night like this. The door opened, and a gust of snow followed a tall man inside. He shook off his coat, set his hat aside, and took a moment to adjust to the dim light. His name was Thomas Hale, though she did not know it yet. He scanned the room with the quiet certainty of a man accustomed to danger and responsibility. When he saw her, he paused. He approached without haste. He asked if she was stranded. She answered carefully, guarding the truth. He noticed the satchel first, then the careful, disciplined way she held her shoulders. When she said she was trained in medical work, he didn't question her credibility. He simply nodded, as if that piece of information filled a need he had not voiced aloud. Thomas offered his coat. She hesitated, then accepted. Warmth rushed back into her body, like a returning memory. He asked if she had a place to stay. She shook her head. He didn't offer pity. Instead, he offered a ride to his ranch, a place with shelter, food, and people who could use her skill. His voice held no pressure, only sincerity. Mara weighed her options. The station was freezing. The night was growing worse. And something in his steady manner told her he was not a man who took advantage of the vulnerable. She agreed to go. The ride through the storm was long. Snow stung her cheeks and gathered along the brim of his hat. His horse pushed through drifts with patient strength. Mara held her satchel close, aware that everything she owned in the world rested inside it. Thomas spoke little, but when he did, it was with clarity. How far the ranch was, how many workers needed care, how long they had gone without proper medical help. He told her he wasn't looking for a miracle worker, only someone willing to stay until spring. She told him she needed work and a place where her past wouldn't cage her. Neither made promises. When they reached Holloway Creek Ranch, lanterns glowed against the snow, and smoke curled from chimneys in soft gray ribbons. The ranch was not wealthy, but well-kept. Workers stepped out of barns to look at the newcomers. Some nodded politely. Others stared with curiosity. Mara kept her head high. Thomas introduced her to Maeve O'Rourke, the foreman, a tough, weathered woman whose straightforward gaze carried no nonsense. Maeve shook Mara's hand and asked only one question. Could she work under pressure? Mara replied that pressure had been her life for years. Maeve accepted that answer immediately. Thomas showed Mara a small room near the west barn, warm and clean, with a narrow bed and a small table. The simplicity comforted her more than luxury ever had. He told her she could rest until morning. She asked instead to see the infirmary. The ranch had no true infirmary, only a loft with crates of supplies. Mara inspected everything with practiced eyes. Bandages were scarce. Antiseptic was low. Needles were dull. She organized what little they had and made a list for replacements. Thomas watched quietly, surprised by the precision of her movements. That night, a ranch hand came in with a deep gash on his arm from a broken fence rail. Mara cleaned it, stitched it, and wrapped it with firm, efficient motions. The man winced but thanked her. Maeve nodded with approval. Thomas said nothing, but Mara noticed he lingered long enough to make sure the worker walked out steady. Over the next days, Mara's presence settled into the ranch like a missing puzzle piece. She treated a man with frostbite, soothed a child with fever, and calmed a skittish horse that had been poorly handled. She worked early and late, aware of every whisper around her name. Some were respectful, some were curious. All were watching to see if she would stay. Thomas visited her workspace each evening, not to intrude, but to check if she needed supplies or assistance. He spoke plainly, always giving her room to choose. He never asked about her past. She never volunteered it. Trust was building in slow, quiet steps, but the story hints at what's coming. Some strangers remember her name from back east. Some carry grudges. And someone, somewhere, knows she did not run west without reason. For now, the ranch breathes easier. For now, she has a place. But winter never leaves without testing those who seek refuge from their past. The weeks after Mara's arrival passed like pages of a slow, steady chronicle. Winter weakened its grip, though the morning still carried a bite sharp enough to stiffen fingers. At Holloway Creek Ranch, routine settled around her presence. Workers stopped knocking hesitantly and began entering her small loft space with quiet trust. And Mara, for the first time in years, began waking without dread. Thomas Hale checked on her work with the same calm insistence he brought to every part of ranch life. He asked if she needed more blankets, more lantern oil, more antiseptic. What she needed most was a sense that her skills mattered, and he gave her that without ceremony. One morning, she treated a ranch hand named Silas who had taken ill from drinking water too close to a stagnant pool. She soothed his stomach, cooled his fever, and scolded him lightly for ignoring basic caution. Silas laughed and promised to do better. Maeve, watching from the doorframe, muttered that Mara had the patience of a preacher and the accuracy of a sharpshooter. That same afternoon, Thomas invited Mara to ride with him along the southern boundary. He said he needed to inspect a broken fence line. She suspected he wanted to talk where walls couldn't overhear, but she agreed. The horse he chose for her was calm and sure-footed. She mounted carefully, mindful of her long skirt, and followed him through the crisp air. As they rode, he spoke of the land, the herds, the challenges of keeping a ranch running through hard seasons. She listened with a quiet interest she hadn't expected to feel. She had always thought of ranching as a world built on brute strength, but Thomas spoke of it like a craft, one shaped by foresight and patience as much as muscle. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, he stopped. She stopped beside him. The land stretched in every direction, a quilt of pale brown grass and dark brush. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of the ranch house, a steady line against the blue sky. Thomas asked her if she felt she could stay. She took her time answering. She told him she didn't want to be a burden, that she didn't want to repeat the mistakes of trusting the wrong people back east. He said she had proven herself in every way that mattered. He said the ranch needed someone capable. He did not mention himself, but she sensed something unspoken beneath his words. For now, she said she would stay until spring. He nodded as if that was enough. A curiosity began to travel among the workers. Why had she come west? Why did she seem to carry grief beneath her calm expression? Mara kept her story buried, though she knew rumors had a way of growing without water. Days stretched into a pattern. Nights softened into quiet resilience. She learned the rhythms of the ranch. She learned that Maeve had once trained under a traveling nurse and carried knowledge of herbs no one else understood. She learned that Thomas often worked long after others slept, repairing equipment by lantern light. One cold evening, while Mara boiled water for cleaning instruments, Thomas appeared at her door with a crate. Inside were medical supplies she had listed weeks earlier, items she never dreamt could acquire so quickly. Fresh gauze, clean needles, new scalpels, antiseptic alcohol, powdered charcoal, and sponges. She traced the crate's edge with her fingers, stunned. He said it wasn't charity. It was preparation. A ranch without care was a ranch one accident away from ruin. She thanked him quietly. He nodded and stepped back out into the night, without expecting anything in return. But the crate had unintended consequences. That very night, A rider arrived from town, a mail courier with a bundle of letters. One was addressed to Holloway Creek Ranch, marked for Thomas Hale. He opened it privately in his office. But the next morning, Mara sensed a shift in his expression, a slight tension woven into his otherwise measured voice. He didn't mention the letter until later that week. They were tending to a young hand with a swollen ankle when he finally spoke. Someone in town had heard that a woman named Mara Whitcomb was working at the ranch. Someone had asked where she came from. Someone knew her name from newspapers back east. Mara felt her stomach twist. She asked him what he told them. He replied that he told them nothing. Her past was hers to reveal, not the town's to uncover. She returned to her loft that night with her pulse racing and her hands trembling. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at her satchel. Inside, folded with painful precision, was a letter that had driven her out of the East. She opened it with a stiff breath. It was a threat disguised as concern, a warning written by the physician she had refused. He had claimed she was unfit for medical work. He had claimed she was unstable. He had claimed she would face consequences if she continued to speak of what he had tried to do. The words still cut. She folded the letter and tucked it away again. At dawn, she moved to the ranch slower than usual. Her hands did not tremble while working, but her eyes were dull with fear. Maeve noticed. Thomas noticed. Neither pushed her. They simply gave her space. Around noon, the ranch child she had treated weeks earlier came running toward her with a cough. His mother said it had worsened overnight. Mara recognized the rasp of his breathing and the fever in his cheeks. She worked quickly, cooling it with water and pressing herbs Maeve supplied. She stayed with him for hours until his breathing eased. By sundown, the boy slept peacefully. His mother cried into Mara's hands. Gratitude too heavy for words. Thomas stood quietly in the doorway, watching. Later that night, he walked her back to her loft. The silence between them felt warmer than the oil lamp she carried. Before she stepped inside, he asked if she wanted to tell him the truth of her past. She said not yet. He nodded without judgment. Something deepened between them in that moment. Not romance, but trust. The kind that takes root slowly in cold soil. As the weeks passed, the letter from town faded into background noise. No one at the ranch treated her differently. No one whispered behind her back. Her fears did not disappear, but they loosened enough for her to breathe. Then spring broke across the valley in a single rush of warmth. Grass rose. Creek water brightened. Horses grew restless. The ranch came alive, and with spring came new work. Mara treated rope burns, sun headaches, and bee stings. Maeve taught her how to mix prairie herbs with alcohol for better healing. Thomas asked her opinion on building a larger infirmary. She suggested designs. He listened. The ranch was becoming something she didn't dare name yet, but it felt close to belonging. One evening, as she walked past corral, Thomas called her name. He stood beside a small chest. Inside were wood planks, nails, and a drawn plan. He said it was the start of her new treatment room. Her own dedicated space. Not a loft, a real infirmary. She asked him why he was investing so much in her. He said the ranch deserved proper care. She asked why now. He said it was time. But the truth behind his eyes told her something else. Something even he wasn't ready to say. As spring settled fully, life felt almost gentle, almost safe. But safety is fragile in places built by weather and history. And the person from her past who recognized her name wasn't done asking questions. Spring settled over Holloway Creek Ranch like a long breath finally released. Grass pushed through thawed soil, and the air carried the scent of new beginnings. Mara Whitcomb worked each day with growing confidence, unaware that a quiet storm was forming far beyond the ranch fences. The letter Thomas received weeks earlier had come from a merchant in town who remembered hearing about a woman from the East who had left under suspicious circumstances. Rumors in frontier towns traveled faster than wind, but nothing more had come of it until early summer. On a warm morning, as sunlight slanted across the barnyard, a wagon rolled up the main lane. Its driver asked for Thomas Hale. Thomas went out to greet him, and Mara watched from a distance. The driver handed Thomas a folded message. Mara recognized the sharp stillness in Thomas's posture as he read. Something in that letter wasn't meant to stay on paper. Later, Thomas found Mara in her new infirmary space, sanding the top of a wooden shelf he had helped her install days earlier. She asked him what the letter said. He hesitated. Then he told her plainly. Someone from the East had arrived in Cheyenne asking questions. Someone who claimed to be conducting an inquiry into her former employment. Someone who wanted to speak to her. Mara felt her hands go cold. She asked Thomas if the man had named himself. He said yes. The name was familiar, too familiar. The physician she had defied. The same man who had tried to silence her. The one whose accusations had ended her life back east. She turned away, steadying herself against the work table. She asked whether he was coming here. Thomas said no, not yet. But he was staying in Cheyenne, meeting people, gathering gossip, trying to learn all he could before showing his face. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Mara wanted to run, but she didn't. Instead, she sat on the edge of a wooden stool, breathing slowly, fighting the old panic pressing against her ribs. She told Thomas she didn't want trouble. She told him she couldn't survive another wave of lies. He said she didn't have to. He said the ranch stood behind her. Every worker she had helped would vouch for her. Maeve, Thomas, the families, the ranch hands. None would believe any rumor from a distant city. The next day, one of the ranch boys brought her wildflowers. He said his mother told him to thank Mara again for saving his life. Mara accepted the flowers with a soft smile, but her mind kept drifting to man in Cheyenne, stirring up old shadows. Summer arrived in full. Long days of heat and cattle drives. Dust rising from hooves. Fresh injuries, sunburns, swollen joints. Horse mishaps. Nothing unusual for frontier work. Mara stayed busy. She tried not to think about the past inching closer, one rumor at a time. One evening, as the workers gathered outside the bunkhouse, Thomas approached Mara's porch with 2 mugs of warm tea. They sat side by side, watching the sky turn from gold to deep violet. He told her he didn't believe fear should make choices for anyone. She told him she didn't believe a past should decide a future. He agreed. Their conversations became longer, quieter, more honest. Maeve noticed. She made no comment, but she began leaving extra herbs in Mara's doorway and took on more morning chores than necessary. Mara understood the gesture. Support didn't always need words. Then one afternoon, a rider from town arrived with news. The man from the east had left Cheyenne after learning that Holloway Creek Ranch had no interest in talking. He had filed papers with local officials. But the officials, hearing the ranch's reputation and the testimonies of townspeople who had brought sick children to Mara, declined to pursue anything. Word spread quickly. Workers came to her throughout the day, offering thanks, bringing small gifts of jerky, mended gloves, or carved pieces of wood. Mara felt tears pressed behind her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt defended. But the most unexpected moment came when she returned to her loft after tending to a horse's strained leg. On her table lay a single sealed envelope. Inside it was a note written in unfamiliar handwriting. It contained only one sentence. You build a life here. Don't lose it because of the past. There was no signature, only truth. That evening, Thomas stopped by as he often did. He asked if she wanted to take a walk. They walked past the corral, past the creek, past the cottonwoods that marked the southern edge of the ranch. The sky overhead was clear and bright, the air carrying the soft chorus of insects. Thomas paused beneath a cottonwood and turned toward her. He said he had been thinking for months about what the ranch needed. Then he said he had also been thinking for months about what he needed. Mara waited. He told her he didn't want her to leave when spring passed or when summer ended. He told her she had changed the ranch. He told her she had changed him. His voice stayed calm, but the honesty of it felt like something deeper than any confession. Mara felt her breath catch. She had tried to keep her heart guarded. She had tried not to build too much meaning into quiet evenings and shared stories. But listening to him now, she understood the truth she had been avoiding. She had found a place that recognized her worth, not for what others had said about her, but for what she did with her own hands. She told him she wasn't ready to make promises. She told him she didn't want to repeat old mistakes by trusting too soon. Thomas accepted that without protest. He said trust wasn't something he asked for. It was something built day by day. They walked back together in silence, but the silence felt warm. As the sun dipped fully below the horizon, a lantern flickered outside Mara's infirmary. The flame bent in the evening breeze, casting a gentle glow over the ranch path. She thought of the letters she had received. She thought of all she had endured, and she realized she no longer felt afraid of the man from her past. She felt strong, steady, rooted. Over the next weeks, life continued with surprising softness. Workers recovered quickly under Mara's care. Maeve helped her plant herbs behind the infirmary cabin. Children from the ranch homes brought her small treasures they found in the fields. Thomas stopped by each evening with news of the day. And then, one cool morning, as dew shimmered on the grass, the rider from Cheyenne returned with final news. The man from the east had left the territory entirely. He would not bother her again. Mara stood outside her door, sunlight touching her face. She felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She breathed in the scent of prairie grass. She thought of the long journey that brought her here, from fear to survival to quiet purpose. Thomas came to stand beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The peace around them said enough. Mara looked out at the ranch she had helped mend. She thought of her past, no longer chasing her. She thought of her future, open as the Wyoming horizon. And for the first time since leaving the East, she allowed herself to believe in something simple and true. She had found a place where her life could begin again. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more Western tales, drop a like, and tell me in the comments if you want another story like this. Your support keeps these stories alive.